In Monster Rancher, most monsters have a developer-intended playstyle, and their text and stats reflect that. For some it's murkier than others, but they generally fit into archetypes. With Tiger you have low base damage and high critical hit rates, with Dragon you have cinematic attacks with long animation times and spectacular crushing damage, and it makes perfect thematic sense that Pixie's Elementalist archetype has her controlling fire and lightning, and that the former focuses on damage while the latter relies on speed. Regardless of what a monster's final level of power ended up being in practice, the theming is really strong in Monster Rancher 2. We've covered a few different styles at this point in the Rundown series, but very few monsters in the entire Monster Rancher franchise have such a singular purpose and laser focus in their theming as today's does. Naga is portrayed in the lore as the most cruel of all monsters. His existence is predicated on violence, and he lives to fight. In the anime, he's one of Moo's big bad four, and he's got a gun, because... I don't know why he's got a gun, but it's sick as hell. Look at this shit. Look at him go. Lots of people love Naga, and I've gotten a bunch of requests for him despite his fairly basic design, name, and utilitarian attacks. So much so that this is the first Patreon chosen Rancher rundown. He's just a neat little snake man, and apparently that's enough for fans of Monster Rancher 2, even if he doesn't actually get a gun in-game. Like I mentioned off the top, Naga's whole shtick is that he loves to fight. His battle-honed edge is apparent in his stats. High power and skill on the same main breed monster is very rare. Naga has average defensive stats because he's focused on the killing, not the not being killing. You don't need to defend if your opponent is already dead, and Naga's in-game playstyle perfectly backs this up. An above-average guts rate also helps facilitate his relentless offensive pressure. Naga is tied with Dragon, Joker, and a few others for the worst lifespan in the game. Coupled with average but not fantastic stat gains and a guts rate that is good, but not anything incredible, you end up with one of the worst monsters to use as a subbreed in the entire game casually. He usually only ends up tanking the main breed stats and lifespan and adds nothing. In competitive play, Naga subs are completely outclassed by Pixie, Plant, and Tiger subs, as every monster with a Naga sub also has access to these much quicker guts rate breeds. But Naga makes the main breed purple, and the value of this cannot be overlooked.
See it purple! Nothing about this game is that intense.
As you know by now though, techs and not stat gains are what denote the real strength in a monster, and this is where Naga shines. What may be surprising at first glance is that Naga doesn't actually have any techs that do a lot of damage, but you don't necessarily need brute force to score a quick kill. Naga is aggression incarnate, and an onslaught of extremely quick, cheap, and moderately damaging techs help position him as one of the absolute best monsters in the game. He's so strong that in hard mode, he's one of the only monsters in the entire game to see significant nerfs, and in the Switch port of Monster Farm 2, he's widely considered the strongest monster in all metas after Metal Nerf. He's not without his flaws though, however minor they may be. Naga's basic techs are bafflingly inaccurate. I think the implication with this is that with such high skill gains, you won't need to work too much, but this inaccuracy really hampers their consistency and usefulness. Not many monsters can rely on their basics, and Naga isn't an exception here either. At least they're cheap though. Quack does middling 12 damage with -5 hit, but it only costs 10 guts. You get what you pay for here. It's not really a great move, but there are far worse techs to spend 10 guts on in the game. Belly Punch does a respectable 14 damage, which is a solid force number for a basic tech on a faster guts rate breed, since basic techs usually plummet in usefulness around this guts tier. It does have a bit of incidental withering too, which really helps it out and mitigates the notably inaccurate -8 hit. Again though, this tech only costs 10, so even with the inaccuracy factored in, it's still moderately useful for its cost. It's not great, but I mean, it can help out. So he's got a slow start, but here's where Naga kicks into high gear. The rest of Naga's power techs are all incredibly powerful. Stab is one of the quickest attacks in the game with a 1.5 second animation time. It's so fast that even though the rest of his power techs all animate much quicker than the average tech does, they feel really slow and committal in comparison. 15 force and 8 hit for 14 guts is already great, but once you factor in the small amount of withering and the quick animation, it starts to get a little absurd. Chaining multiple in a row can throttle your opponent's resources really hard while also applying consistent damage and running down the timer. Stab is a great tech to control the pace of a match and overwhelm your opponent. Pierce does more or less the same. It's a bit more expensive, but the boost to force and withering keep it well within the realm of still being overpowered for its cost. The animation time is notably longer than Stab, but, you know, everything is if we're being honest. It has almost an identical use case to Stab and sits in slot 2, so there's no downside to grabbing both. But if Stab's enough for you and you don't want to double up with Pierce, Naga's got another slot 2 tech that also seems like a mistake numerically. Tail Assault is bonkers. It's got an incredible force to guts ratio, even when compared to other heavy techs that, as an archetype, forgo all accuracy to double down on force. Golem's Uppercut, Ape's Grab Throw, and Zilla's Roll Assault are all examples of techs that boast high offense for a low cost because they're inaccurate as all hell, but even within this specific niche, none of them come close to Tail Assault. It's significantly cheaper, animates way faster than all of the above, and sits on a monster with a way faster guts rate than any of those as well. well. So the inherent medium risk and high reward of this archetype is completely skewed on Tail Assault in favor of the Naga. It will get significantly more chances to swing Tail Assault than any of those other monsters will with their techs, and on top of that, Naga never puts itself in a bad spot on a single whiff. It's wild. You get game-changing potential for 15 guts, with the only downside being that it misses more often than it hits. 37% chance to hit may not be great, but 4 or 5 37% rolls when you only need to hit one is money in the bank. Drill attack is similarly cost efficient. Nearly A force for 23 guts on Naga's regeneration rate is hard to overrate. The animation time and higher cost makes this much more of a gamble than Tail Assault, and it ends up being significantly less useful in a real match, but it can still steal games pretty easily. The only real caveat is that when used on the first frame of battle, its risk reward is significantly worse for you than if it is used later on in a match with a guts advantage. With the same accuracy as Tail Assault, it's likely to miss, and this can set you back early on. But all of the above pale in comparison to Naga's special power tech. It's rare for a special tech to be valued in a way where its cost not only makes sense numerically, but also gives you the parameters you're actually looking for. Plenty of special techs justify their 40 to 50 guts cost by having superfluous withering and sharpness on a tech with force too low to make it matter, but not Naga. For 45 guts, you get Turn Assault, a tech so good that it's banned in some of the more niche metas. Barely more powerful than Drill Attack, plus a ton of withering and +5 hit, this move is already pretty great on its own, but what makes it especially dumb is the fact that Naga has nothing else expensive to spend its guts on. Because everything he has is so cheap, this ends up being the only real risk he ever has to take. And with numbers that immediately swing the fight in his favor more than 50% of the time, you'd be hard-pressed to actually call that risky. Normally when a move costs 45 guts, you're expecting a huge advantage, and Turn Assault is exactly this. Landing it puts you ahead and stops your opponent from mounting a counterattack. And that's it for Naga's power techs. He doesn't have many, but they range from usable at worst to meta-defining at best. A defining trait of Naga's power techs is that they all have a very low chance to crit. Because of this, his techs end up being really stable and none of them end up relying on their sharpness to make them cost-effective. But the consistency in Naga's kit plummets pretty drastically if you decide to focus on the intelligence side. None of Naga's non-special intelligence techs are expensive either, so they keep up the theme of consistent pressure, but their weakness is in their accuracy. Energy Shot's numbers really aren't too bad for 17 guts when viewed in a vacuum. It's got pretty solid force and withering coupled with the chance to turn into a B-Force tech on a crit 25 to 35% of the time. But Energy Shot has the same abysmal hit percent as Tail Assault. The withering for the cost is really good, but withering matters a lot less in the long run if you're gonna whiff the tech 2/3 of the time. Once we take a look at the rest of his intelligence kit, it might make a bit more sense as to why this move fails to make as big of an impact as Tail Assault does. Energy Shots offers higher force, crit, and hit percent for a pretty significant increase in price, even if it's still cheap. 24 guts for these numbers is arguably even more effective than its predecessor, but more often than not it means you'll probably put yourself in a hole time-wise as the tech only does as much as Tail Assault once again. This is another attack that isn't too bad on its own, but in the context of what Naga excels at, is drastically outclassed. Poison Gas is another move that works really well on a thematic level but doesn't offer too much in the way of competitive strength. Incredibly cheap at only 15 guts, this move can wither up to 24 guts at a time and has a pretty usable -4 hit. You can use Poison Gas to help slow down your opponent's tempo in a big way, as there is very little risk for missing and pretty big value for landing the hit. But Poison Gas has a big weakness. It makes absolutely no sense to use in the context of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the concept that time is a finite resource, and by choosing one option that takes up your time, you have committed to it and do not have the opportunity to spend that time doing anything else. Poison Gas may be very cost effective, but at only 12 force, it's Naga's weakest tech, and committing to Poison Gas means you're not committing to something else that could be significantly more impactful for the same price. If you're willing to trade in 9% accuracy and 2 extra guts, you have a tech that does almost double the damage even before a crit, and still has decent withering and Energy Shot. Even if you would only land 60% as many Energy Shot attempts as you would Poison Gases, you'll probably win a similar amount or maybe even more matches. In what has become a running theme for Naga's intelligence techs, Poison Gas is fine and cost efficient for what it does, but it's just not particularly impactful in a real match. I-Beam is Naga's most damaging intelligence tech and is backed up by a solid chance to land a crit. Pretty solid force and withering backed up by a 41% chance to crit helps offset the -11 hit, but this means that Naga is left without any real reliable damage on the intelligence side. When I first talked about Energy Shot, I mentioned that its weaknesses would be more pronounced once we took a look at the rest of his intelligence techs. The unfortunate reality is that all of his sharp techs fill the exact same role: decent withering and unreliable damage output. Poison Gas being so weak that its relatively good chance to hit is outclassed in usefulness by everything else Naga has really hammers in how risky and one-note his intelligence techs are. But he's got one left, and maybe the story's different there. I mean, Life Drain's got -19 hit, so no. It's one of Naga's more powerful techs, but the cost is far and away his most expensive. And like I mentioned before, recovery and drain techs have limited use in the hands of AI-controlled monsters. The cost only makes any sort of numerical sense when applying it to a situation where Naga gets a chance to recover a ton of life. Since you can still use this tech when at full life or when barely damaged, Life Drain's usual fate is that it's a significantly worse version of I-Beam. Naga's faster than average guts regen means that guts correction will pull this tech below a 30% chance at hitting more often than not, and is a good example of a tech that will only ever have real use in the single player game where you can abuse Naga's great skill gains. Naga is one of the best monsters in the entire game, and normally when something in a video game is very strong, there's a lot of pressure to optimize it as far as it can go. That's how we end up with the build. Naga's power build has one real choice, and that's what you want to focus on in his second slot. You can double down on accuracy with Pierce, you can double down on damage with Tail Assault, or you can do both. Normally you want to have a few techs in each slot and only rely on the best of the best, but both Pierce and Tail Assault are overpowered, so usually you just end up getting both and let the AI swing what it wants. If your opponents are going to be mostly tanks, you can forgo Pierce, and if they're mostly speedy, you can forgo Tail Assault. But keeping both works for everything. And as strong as Pierce and Tail Assault are, Turn Assault and Stab are even stronger. Drill Attack is the only real liability, as opening with it won't usually kill, and those few seconds spent walking forward into slot 3 help Naga pad out its guts pool a little bit before attacking with Turn Assault anyway, so you usually won't see Drill Attack in competitive. His intelligence build is kind of weird, and it's used so infrequently that we don't have a ton of data about what the real optimal loadout would look like, but it would probably look something like this. I beam over energy shots because it's basically the same tech with 50% more withering and lifesteal as a necessary pickup to cover up belly punch, even though it's kinda awful. For mixed attacker rule sets, you'd probably just go with his normal power build. It's perfect as is. It's the build. Time Noise is the fastest Naga at 8 guts, and in DX, Punisher ties it. However, neither are the strongest Naga. Ripper sits just behind Time Noise and Punisher at 9 guts rate, which is still very quick and has the added bonus of being able to get whatever battle specials it wants, including Grit, Hurry, Fury, or whatever else your heart desires. 9 times out of 10, this is a much better trait to have than a slightly faster guts rate, even if the jump from 9 to 8 is a noticeable one. Like, look at this shit. The 2021 Cup Koei Tecmo ran had a stat cap of, well, 2021, which is insanely low, and when coupled with their best to one single elimination format, that means consistency is not possible. A single loss and you're out, and a single strong hit at 30% could end your entire run in seconds. And despite that, half the top 8 were Rippers. With Metal Nerve banned, Naga is a contender for absolute best monster in the game. So, the future of Naga is an ultimately uncertain one. Only a few select monsters sit in this tier directly below Metal Nerve, and none of the others have Naga's trait of no serious weaknesses. Even the Mighty Golem has an exploitable guts rate, and the powerful Undine has the propensity to spam a useless tech. Naga takes on all opponents the exact same way and with unparalleled consistency. It's no risk and it's all reward. Only time will tell if the fast guts rate Nagas will become commonly banned in competitive play. Lots of balance changes took place between Monster Rancher 1 and 2, with most of the best Monster Rancher 1 monsters getting nerfed into oblivion and some of the worst monsters getting heavily buffed. Naga is one of the latter, but given the new competitive climate, it's possible he flew a bit too close to the sun. Hey guys, just want to say thanks again for watching these videos. I know it's been a little while since the last one. I've been putting a lot of work into my other stuff. I've been uploading daily, I've got a new Discord. Streaming has been kind of crazy. We hit 400 people during the Deluxe Cup, so you know, that meant a lot. If you like the content, consider subscribing, either on Twitch or here on YouTube, or even through Patreon. I do appreciate all of the support I've got lately. It's been completely surreal, and I know I've said it before, but it does mean the world to me that I get to talk about Monster Rancher with everybody. So, if you want to see more content, please consider supporting. Until the next one, I guess I'm out, and I'll see you then.